The classical tarot embraces 4 subdivisions of occultism, which are expressed as alchemy, astrology, Kabbalah, and magic. So, for each major arcanum, or trump, the writer has had to reserve a certain portion of the text for each of these subdivisions. But, in every case, the main part has been dedicated to, firstly, an explanation of the symbolism of the picture on each card. Secondly, to the place of the particular arcanum in the scheme of the tetragrammaton. Thirdly, to an explanation of the Hebrew letter belonging to the card. Fourthly, to the corresponding branch of occult teachings, Western and Eastern alike, yogas included. And finally, to exercises for the practical use of the mental equations, provided by the theosophical operations with the figures, leading to the stabilization of the mental processes in the student's mind, the creating of new currents of thought, and subsequently to the deeper understanding of the fate of the macrocosm and microcosm in the world's manifestation as we know it. The exercises are usually placed at the end of the arcana. It seems that they are especially attractive to most students, simply because it is then possible to see how the theory which has been expounded actually works in practice. I am not a believer in sterile lecturing, which is rather like learning to drive a car merely from a manual, without having any practical experience on the road. So, as the tarot is not only a more or less fascinating literary subject, but it is also just the algebra of occultism, I have arranged the contents of the book accordingly. Anyway, it is for the reader to see for himself how this has been done. In treating of the arcana, I have adapted the classical method of analysis. This means that they are considered according to the normal numerical sequence that is positioned in the whole pack of 22 cards, which means that Arcanum 1 is followed by Arcanum 2, 3, 4, and so on. A Russian author who wrote a booklet about the tarot, P.D. Osupensky, made an attempt to break this tradition and to consider the arcana in pairs. Here is an extract from his opinions and explanations in the matter, from the Russian edition of the Tarot, The Ancient Pack of Cards, 1912. It is known that in the subterranean initiatory temples of ancient Egypt, the paintings depicting the ideas of the tarot were arranged in 2 rows, probably on columns, with a passageway between them. This has been confirmed by the well-known occult writer and authority on Hermetism, P. Christian, in his History of Magic. If this was so, then it is possible that in one row there were arcana from 1 to 11, and in the opposite one, arcana 21, or 0, to 12. Osupensky supposes that such an argument was made in order to allow the aspirants for high initiation to read the pictures in pairs, and not separately. If this was the case, then it could have been, for example, that opposite Arcanum 1 was that of 21, or 0, while 2 corresponded to 22, and so on. The student can complete the series for himself. But this theory, which requires the arcana to be studied in pairs, does not find any support among the foremost of the authoritative writers on the tarot. Moreover, the actual interpretation of the arcana as given by Osupensky is more poetical than scientific or logical. A peculiar property of the East European mind manifests itself in Osupensky. When is his interpretation, he very often allows himself to yield to the feeling of fear. Some of the arcana are terrifying for him. I cannot agree with such an attitude, and as far as I know, neither does any other author. In his analysis, he relies more on a kind of individual vision than on a strictly impartial interpretation. However, he wrote the book, which I read in its original Russian edition of 1912, when he was still comparatively young, and consequently perhaps more emotional and less experienced than in his later years. Another point on which I disagree with Osupensky is his unjust treatment of Dr. Gerard and Caussé, Papists, who contributed incomparably more to the wisdom of the tarot than Osupensky. Papists followed the classical tradition of Eliphas Lévy, which is only right. It is true that the learned French doctor had little emotion when he interpreted the tarot in his main books on the subject, that is, the Tarot of the Bohemians and the Divinatory Tarot, but the work which he performed in these two books is and will remain as a classical primer for everyone who begins to study the Hermetic philosophy of the arcana. The clear, concise exposition of Papus seems to be much more convincing than the two individual conceptions of Osipinski. The Divinatory Tarot is provided with a full set of cards, that is 22 major and 56 minor arcana, made under the direction of Papus. They are quite artistic and at the same time preserve most of the symbols and hieroglyphs. It would be very useful for each student to obtain a good, complete set of the tarot cards, with exact presentation of symbols and other figures, so that they can be used apart from the book. But it might not be very easy to do so at the present time. I have been informed from France that the Divinatory Tarot of Papus has long since been unobtainable, there as well as in England, while the Tarot of Oswald Worth is too old. Therefore, I have provided this book with a new, symbolically exact version of the major arcana. The work is so constructed that in the chapters dealing with the arcana proper, there will not be any general explanations, but only those which refer to the particular trump under discussion. This is because of the necessity to concentrate solely on one idea when studying each arcanum. Therefore, in this introduction, there must be given everything which does not belong directly to any one of the 22 major arcana. This brings us firstly to the great central idea of the whole construction of the tarot. It is the tetragrammaton,